Shalom. Welcome to the second installment of After Heart Ministries Midrash Shabbat 2.0. Today we are discussing the parasha Vayera, and very specifically, we have been discussing at this time, we have been discussing Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're about to touch on some things about Sodom and Gomorrah. During the lunch break, we had some discussion, Deborah and I did, about justice and righteousness, where righteousness is the action of providing for the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, and the Levite. However, the justice is protecting them. So on one side, you're protecting and you're preventing exploitation. And on the other side, you're doing the opposite of exploitation. You are actually carrying out the provision and protection. Mm-hmm. So on the one side, you are preventing somebody from exploiting, and on the other side, you are providing for. We talked a little bit about Sarah,
and the fact that the children of Abraham would be doing both.
Right. So currently, we're going to get into Sodom and Gomorrah. However, and we are kind of nibbling right now, having and consuming our snacks, so to speak. So there might be a little bit of interruption there, but generally speaking, that is where we're at right now. Mm-hmm. So we'll go ahead and share my screen and provide the foundation for this next part of the discussion, but I will go ahead and have you read the first rabbi's nugget. And actually, go ahead and read them all, because I might want to address something else first. Okay.
What is the significance of the word destroy in the conversation between Abraham and Yahweh? Also, who uses it, and is there significance? That's the first question.
Okay.
Who is Abraham talking to in chapter 18?
Okay.
I get somebody different than Yahweh.
Go ahead.
And number 3, did Yahweh even intend to stop at Abraham's tent? What are the ramifications of this answer? So that's probably the first one we need to.
Well, we kind of already answered that.
We already kind of did, yep. Mm-hmm. And what does Sodom and Gomorrah really mean as a meaning?
Okay, so let's start with some important things, okay? All right, so let's go back to 18. In 18, we see Abraham ask the men to stop, right? And not pass him by, right? Do not continue on your journey. Turn in here and let me give you hospitality.
Ooh, does that mean Abraham was being a thorn to Yahweh?
Explain.
If he's asking them to turn in
from
here,
the path,
like that, turn from their path, then he's being a thorn.
So he's being an adversary to the fact that Yahweh was going to pass by. Or I'm sorry, pass over.
Mm-hmm.
We established in the first video that, or in the first midrash, that before the break, that Yahweh was not intending to stop at the tent, but was actually going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, to investigate, to check and see if the cry was true. It doesn't really say that he's going down to destroy. We'll get to that. Okay. So he grabs a hold of the three of them and pulls them in and says, let me give you some hospitality. We've established that's Passover. We've established that Isaac was born during Sukkot, or during Feast of Tabernacles. And we've established that Isaac was annunciated at Hanukkah. We've also established that this is the same is true for Yeshua. And so that would make sense that this would kind of be a prophecy of how it would work out. Because then the rabbis could go in and read Torah and see when the Messiah should be born, and it wouldn't be so complicated. But good luck with that. They didn't do a very good job there. The Magi, whom Daniel trained, would have had to have done that. Okay. So now, that being the case, then we can go through and we can ask some questions. And the first one we can ask is, what does it say? So in verse 2, it says, here, let me go ahead and share my screen here. So in verse 2, it says, he looked up and noticed 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to meet them and welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. Okay. And so this right here is Shalusha Anashim. Shalusha, 3, and Anashim, men. Okay. 3 men. So then he speaks to them. My Lord, he says, if it pleases you, stop here for a while. I will just do my little thumbnail here at the bottom. 3 men appeared to Abraham. Okay. He speaks to them as 3, or at least one of them, and calls them his Lord. Now, before we get too caught up in some sort of Christianized Christophany, where this is Abraham talking to Jesus, let's get a little bit more abstract and let's have a little bit less concrete in our thinking type of attitude towards this. The men appear. One of them is Yahweh. How do we know? Because in verse 1, Yahweh appeared again to Avraham near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. One day, Avraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up and noticed 3 men standing there, right? When he saw them, he ran to meet them, welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. Then he says, my Adonai. Now, Abraham already has ownership of land that is way beyond just the area where he has pitched his tent. Why? Because of the battle of Kedalomer. Mm-hmm. So Abraham goes down to Egypt and he gets wealth. What does that mean for Abraham in the land of Canaan? He becomes the provider of sheep and cattle to the entire region. He owns a corporation of money producing assets, right? How do we know? Because when it says that Abraham was sent away from Egypt and from the Philistines, it says he was sent away with many cattle, many livestock, and many servants. Okay. Which is to indicate that he had people working for him and that he had income producing assets. Now, where this really becomes important is when we realize that that makes him a lord, a landlord. But then we add the Battle of Kedalomer. So Kedalomer has an alliance with 4 different nation states, right? And then he himself is a nation state making 5. That's the Amorites, or not the Amorites, that's I can't remember the four nations he's in alliance with, but then he attacks Sodom and Gomorrah. He attacks that region. He attacks the Amorites, and then he attacks two other groups. So 9 groups altogether. Sodom is the only one who returns to the Valley of the Kings and asks for his kingdom back, which Abraham grants, meaning Abraham is Lord of the land. So for Abraham to say, my Adonai or Adoni, my Lord, he is claiming that this one whom he's speaking to is the landlord over him. Okay. So Abraham is already a Lord. Even Sarah calls him my Lord. Right? Mm-hmm. So then he says, if it pleases you, stop here for a while, right? Rest in the shade of this tree while water is brought to wash your feet. Okay. Now, he is dealing with corporeal embodiment. Let me stop this share for a second. When Yeshua encounters the woman at the well, she says that her fathers worshipped, as did Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at this mountain, but you Jews worship in Jerusalem. So which is it? And he says, you've got it mixed up. Nobody worships anywhere because God is spirit, and we will worship in spirit and truth very soon. Meaning what? That it wouldn't matter the location. But what's important for you to know is that when she says Abraham worshiped at this place, that we understand that Abraham wasn't dealing with spirit and truth. He was not dealing with God is spirit. If he's going to wash their feet, then they are corporeal embodiments, meaning they are human, meaning that whatever it was that was there was human. Okay? He's going to wash their feet. And then that same group of men is going to eat. Okay? We got that? Mm-hmm. Because it's about to get deep up in here. Now watch this. Now, here comes the whole blessing about Isaac and all that. That goes through. And of course, we get to Sarah laughing and all the stuff that came up with that, which of course, Deborah had presented that it was actually Isaac within Sarah that was the laughter. And that's why Sarah said, I didn't laugh, because she didn't know that he was within her, because she didn't know that she was pregnant by then, because she was pregnant by then, according to the blessing that God had given in chapter 17. Now, they go through all that, but then it says in verse 16, then the men, how many men? 3. That's how many appeared to him. 3 men got up from their meal and looked out towards Sodom. As they left, Abraham went with them to send them on their way. Now, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But now watch. Then it says, shall I hide my plan from Abraham? Yahweh asked. So then he says down in verse 20, so Yahweh told Abraham, I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because of their sin. Their sin is so flagrant, right? He said this person, human, is speaking to Abraham saying, I have heard the outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. I am going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I have heard, and if not, I want to know. The other men, meaning the man that was standing with Abraham talking to him, was not one of the other men. The other men turned and headed towards Sodom. Now we go into chapter 19. Okay. In chapter 19, that evening, the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom. Now, before we get too caught up in this, this is what I want to show you. So, angels is the word malakim or messenger. We'll get to this. Now, watch this. Then, down here in 12, the angels question Lot. Do you have any other relatives in the city? They asked. Get them out of this place, your sons and daughters, and anyone else. Look at this. For we are about to destroy the city completely. The outcry against this place is so great, it has reached Yahweh, and he has sent us to destroy it. So these angels are going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, watch this. Now we come back up to where the men of the city arrive, right? Before the night, before they retired for the night, the men of Sodom, young and old, came all from all over the city and surrounded the house. They shouted to Lot, "Where are the men who came to spend the night with you?" Okay. So again, they're recognized as men. Okay. Look in verse 10. But the angels reached out, pulled Lot into the house, and bolted the door. Then they blinded all the men, the young and old, who were at the door of the house. So they gave up trying to get inside. So we're flipping from men to angels, men to angels, men to angels, men to angels. And we see this happen again in Genesis chapter, I believe it is 32. Let me see if I can jump there quick. Yeah. As Jacob started on his way, angels of God came to meet him. Then Jacob saw them, when Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, "This is the camp of God." So he called the place Mahanaim, right? Then in the next verse, it says he sent messengers ahead to his brother. Watch this. In this verse, he's encountering angels. In verse 1, he's encountering angels, right? Here we go. It says that he encountered, or he called it Mahanaim, which means two camps, right? But here's the crazy part. In verse 1, it says he encountered Malakei Elohim, angels of God, right? Malakei. But then in verse 3, he sends quote unquote messengers. And they, there it is, Malakim, messengers. But notice if you pick verse 1 and read it, and it says Malakei, it says angels, H4397. But if you pick verse 3, Malakim, H4397, meaning in one verse, Jacob sends men who are messengers to his brother Esau, and the angels are messengers of God, or he sends angels and he encounters angels of God. Okay. So that's one important thing, is that people don't realize that when Jacob encountered the angels in verse 1, he sends them to his brother in verse 3. Okay. But now we have something very interesting going on in Genesis chapter 19. Two angels come to the entrance. What's the word there? Malakim. However, Sodom and Gomorrah don't see angels, right? Where are the men, right? Which is Anashim. Where are the Anashim, right? Okay, so what's my point here? My point here is that three people appear to Abraham. Three mit shalush anashim appear to Abraham, right? So we know that it says Yahweh appeared. We know that three men are present and brought in, and their feet are washed, which is a corporeal body, right? Their feet are washed, they eat food and are satisfied, but then two of them turn and go down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and one of them remains behind. So, what is Abraham actually talking to? A man. Now, there's a few ways that we could go about processing this information. I can tell you that there is something called the emendation of the scribes. The emendation of the scribes says that the scribes, when they were writing the Torah, when they were writing copies of the Torah, determined that they didn't like the equality that was occurring between Abraham and Yahweh. So they edited the text and changed the wording to reflect that fact. They changed the word Yahweh to the word Adonai. Okay? And I'm going to tell you that continued in the pronunciation of the name. When we say Hashim in Judaism, we are saying the name of what? The name of heaven. And when we say the name of heaven, what we are indicating is Yahweh. When we say Adonai, Baruch atah Adonai, what is the actual blessing? Blessed are you, Yahweh, King of the universe, right? Blessed are you, Adonai. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe. Adonai, Adonai and Eloheinu, Melech HaOlam. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe. As opposed to blessed are you, Yahweh, King of the universe, or blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, or Adonki. Okay? But the premise is the same, that the scribes saw this interaction as so off the wall, they actually altered the Torah, which is why we hear in Jeremiah about the lying pen of the scribes. But what's important is that there's still enough information to indicate some really crazy stuff. So two very important things. Number one is there anywhere in the process of anywhere in all of the Bible where Yahweh actually shows up as anything other than a man or a man's inner self?
Well, he shows up as the angel of death in Egypt.
But as of yet, we have not been able to identify that angels are any different from men. Sodom and Gomorrah saw them as men. Abraham saw them as men. Jacob saw them as men. Esau perceived them as men. I propose to you, and you don't have to believe this, that there is no God outside of humanity. That the intensification of all power in the universe chose to manifest through human beings. And that those human beings, when they are on the right track and in the right process, have power, are granted high levels of authority. within the universe and are granted energy to execute a interruption of natural order processes, energy to bring about an exchange of cataclysmic events that appears to be some supernatural being, but is given the appearance of man. Now, where this gets heavy is when we start to get into the idea that means that the only God you will ever encounter is actually your fellow man. The only Yahweh you will ever encounter is one who has tapped into the Yahweh within them, mm-hmm. and is allowing that personality to shine forth.
Which is exactly why Yeshua said, Baruch atah Yahweh. Sorry.
Baruch haba.
Yeah, Baruch haba.
B'shem Adonai.
Yep. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the one who is coming in the name of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And you will not see me until then. Until you recognize the God and the other, you will not see me.
Who constructed heaven as being something out here? Did Hebrews?
No.
Who did?
Was it the
nations?
Yes.
The nations' mythology contains an external heavenly host, or a heavenly group of people, right? Whether it be Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, Sumeria, Acadia, whether it be the Africans, whether it be the northern tribes like Nova Scotia, Scandinavia, so the Norse mythologies, whether it be the Anglican or the Anglo-Saxon mythologies, every one of them, whether it be the German Teutonic tribes, whether it be the Celtic mythologies, all have an external celestial being. But is that what we actually encounter in the Bible? This is, I'm telling you, Vayera. See, Lech Lecha used to be my favorite parasha. But then after what I have encountered in this particular chapter in all of the Bible is the only place where the scribes felt it necessary to manipulate the text. Think about that. Because what they saw was Yahweh as a man. What they saw was Abraham communing with Yahweh as a man, communicating with Yahweh as a man. Now, again, should we be caught up in the Christian theological theory of Christophany? What does Christophany mean? It means the appearance of Christ before he was born. Now we know that Yeshua said, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Mm-hmm. I propose that Abraham realized that Isaac's birth was a prophecy of when Yeshua would be born. Not the Christian theory of Abraham saw my day when he saw the ram in the thicket, but instead he saw the day that he would be born. Right? Because what do we remember from Job? That each son on his day had a celebration. In other words, Job's children had birthday celebrations in which Job would give sacrifices for fear that his children were sinning. Okay, so let's get into it. So Yahweh questions himself. Should I hide my plan from Abraham? Yahweh asked. For Abraham will certainly become great and a mighty nation, and all the nations of earth will be blessed through him. I have singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of Yahweh by doing what is right and just. Then I will do for Abraham all I have promised. So Yahweh told Abraham, I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. I'm going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I have heard. If not, I want to know. Then the other men turned and headed toward Sodom, but Yahweh remained with Abraham. Now, before we go any further, something very, very important is going on here, and that is that part right there. Sorry, wrong button. In verse 16, Abraham says, or Abraham turns and walks with them, right? Walking with them to what? Shalach. Oh, yeah. You guys are going to love this. Okay. So now watch this. We'll go to Romans. I think probably would be the best one. Let's find out. I think Romans or any one of them. Let's say that we'll go to Corinthians. Okay. And how does it start? This is a letter from Paul, chosen by the will of God to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, and from our brothers, Sosthenes. Okay. Here we go. Hebrew word apostolos. Apostolos. What is it? A delegate or messenger, right? From what? Shaluch. Right there. Shaluch. Or a shliach. Now I could tell you if I did not believe in Yeshua and align myself very, very liberally to Christianity, I could go to the New York rabbinate, take a test, and they would give me a shliach. Okay? A shliach is an ordination sending you forth as a rabbi, and they would assign me a congregation somewhere in the United States. Okay? So the New York rabbinate would actually certify me, and then I could have my own congregation. But because I believe in Yeshua, I can never go from being a Messianic rabbi to being a New York rabbinate certified shliach, or somebody who is sent. Okay. Getting back into our text, now you could see that the shliach is actually a commissioning, or it is a sending out. Okay. So now, whoops. So now we see this word shaluch from the word shalach. Well, let's go to its first instance. Genesis 3:22, then the Lord said, look, the human beings have become like us, knowing good and evil. What if they reach out their hand from the tree of life? Then they will live forever. It's that word, send out their hand, reach out their hand, right? And in Genesis chapter 18, verse 16, then the men got up from their meal and looked out towards Sodom as they left. Abraham went with them to send them on their way. As in what? To send them as a delegation. Okay. So here's the question. This delegation that we're talking about, let's go ahead and go back over there. This delegation they're talking about. Okay, it's not going to let me go from here. I will go from here. This delegation that we're talking about is Abraham sending them down to do what it is that they came to do. So now we have a very interesting thing going on concerning Abraham, that he's the one sending these angels to Sodom, not Yahweh. Yahweh says, I will go down and look, right? But if we look in this verse, they say to Lot, the outcry against this place is so great, it has reached Yahweh and he has sent us to destroy it. Wait a minute. Who sent them? Avraham sent them. So there's a couple ways that we could process this information. The first is that we could say that the third man, the third man, Yahweh, later leaves Abraham and goes down because that's what he says he's going to do, right? Okay. But is there any other options for who it is that Abraham is speaking to?
I'm sure you know.
I know that this takes a lot of presuppositions. But when we look at what happened with Job, we have some very interesting information, don't we? In fact, a majority of Christian belief in the devil is based upon Job's encounter.
Mm-hmm.
However, we know that Yahweh as the angel of the Lord seems to be synonymous with Yahweh. So the angel of the Lord and Yahweh seem to be the same function, maybe even the same person, as it were. Stands in opposition to Balaam when Balaam is heading to curse Israel as Satan, Hasatan. And we know Satan is the one who confronts Yahweh about Job. In fact, Yahweh says, you provoke me to hurt him, right? Two very important things that I'm about to illustrate. One is that could not happen without Job's permission. Now, I know that is probably going to make Christians get so angry at me, they're going to put comments. Either that, they're going to block me or they're going to drop me. I might lose some viewers this week. But we are about to see that Yahweh could not even go down to Sodom and Gomorrah without Abraham's permission. Okay? So, if Hasatan is just an adversary, and we have on a few occasions demonstrated that Hasatan is not some external oppositional entity bent on destroying the souls of human beings as is proposed by Christianity. And we know that the devil at large is actually a construct of Dante's Inferno and the construct of Catholic fear-mongering. Furthermore, we know that the word devil in Greek for the New Testament actually is slanderer. And furthermore, we identify that if the kingdom of heaven is within us and the adversary is present in heaven accusing us day and night, that it is actually some accuser within us. Then if Job is accusing himself, who is the Yahweh with Job that is arguing with Hasatan? Job. If the throne of heaven is within you, because the kingdom of heaven is within you, then the throne of heaven is actually the higher self of you, or the Yahweh that you are, dialed back by the darkness and dialed back by the concealments. And therefore, the ego of you, or the accuser of you, or the Hasatan of you is actually the opposition to Yahweh, because the flesh cannot be subject to the law of God, nor indeed is it, or I'm sorry, is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be, for the flesh is enmity with God. And while we were yet enemies, Christ died for our sins. Now we start to get down in the nitty gritty that it is Abraham communing with the two angels. And it is the higher self deciding that it is time for Sodom and Gomorrah to come under the justice of Abraham's Torah, of Abraham's stewardship of the land. Now I know there's a lot there. And when we go into this here, which we have to do, we have to go in and look at the rest of this. But there's something very specific I want you to see. When I was first learning Hebrew, I learned about this Hebrew word, Nun Aleph, which meant please, or a pleading, right? But then I learned about the coercive imperative. The coercive imperative put the subordinate in a position of authority. Okay? Where basically a subordinate could give a command to an authority if they said this word, okay, which was basically, I acknowledge your authority, but do this now, giving a command to an authority figure, which is foreign to us Westerners. We've never heard of such a thing, but we don't understand that the inheritor has authority over the father. You don't understand that once the child takes over the family business, they are the authority over the clan, not the father.
Right.
And we see this in Native American tribes, where the chief only is chief until he gets to a certain age, and then another chief is appointed from his lineage to take over while he's still alive, and he's given permission to go and die. He is given leave to go and die, and he will go off by himself and die. Okay. So, anyways, getting back into this, so we've got this concept then, and this is what it says in the Hebrew. We'll go with starting in this verse, in verse 20. And he said, I have heard, right, the cry of Sodom. So right here, the outcry. And he said, the outcry of Sodom, right? And then he says, and Gomorrah, and he says, is great. The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. And their sin, right, is grave, greatly, grave. Okay. So the first thing he says is this, the first thing he says here is, I've heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. But you see in the Hebrew, it reads a little bit different. Then he says right here, I'm going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I've heard. If not, I want to know. But in the Hebrew, it says something different. Right here. This says, see that coercive right there? That coercive means that he is actually speaking to an authority. I will go down. Rada. Right? Da. And from the root word yarad, to go down. Okay? I will go down. Na. An interjection. Na. I pray now and please. Used to entreaty or exhort. But it is in the sense, and this is important, the na says, I acknowledge your authority. Do this now. But in this case, he's saying, with your permission, I will go down to Sodom and Gomorrah. He uses the na. When I saw this, because it was the first time, so I learned Hebrew. I began studying the parashas in Hebrew, which was an exciting time for me. And all of a sudden, I encountered the na in the middle of me studying the parashas, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, Yahweh's speaking here. Why is he using the word na? I had already been given the education and all of the knowledge concerning the na. The na is, and I acknowledge your authority, do this now. Let me give you an example. The Hebrew word yasha. Yasha is the word for salvation, to save. But really in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, it's to violently remove from danger. Mm-hmm. Right? And of course, we know that the root word is destroyer watches, in the sense that I will observe until you are in danger, and I will destroy that thing that's endangering you. And it is a shepherd. The destroyer watches. The shepherd waits to destroy the predator who would hurt the sheep. Right? The word Yeshua, the name Yeshua, means destroyer watches, to snatch away from danger violently. Right? Hoshea is the causative, cause to save, right? Cause salvation to occur is Hoshea, which was Joshua's name before Moses renamed him. He renamed him from Hoshea, which is cause to save now, to Yehoshua, which is Yahweh's salvation. Hoshea is a imperative second person singular command to somebody who you are in authority over. However, Hoshea na is I acknowledge your authority because I am commanding you right now to cause salvation to occur.
And that's where we get the word Hosanna.
Hosanna. So now they're yelling at Yeshua as he's coming up the trail on the donkey, Hosanna to the Son of David. No, Hoshea na. Hoshana. Hoshana is we acknowledge your authority, but we command you to save us, which really explains how much they were not actually doing what they were supposed to be doing. They wanted relief from Rome, period. Okay. So now, and this is important, why in the world is Yahweh saying to Abraham, I'm going to go down to Sodom and I am going to what? See if the outcry is true. That's all he says to him, which will get us to our next nugget. Go ahead and read it.
Okay.
The destroy part.
Yeah. What is the significance of the word destroy in the conversation between Abraham and Yahweh? Also, who uses it? And Abraham's the first one who uses it.
Mm-hmm.
And is it significant?
Okay. So this is what I want you to think about. First and foremost, and this is important, who had sovereignty over the land by promise, by conquering, and by wealth?
Abraham did.
Okay. So we know he conquered Kedalomer, takes over the land of Sodom, grants the people and the loot back to Sodom because he is what? Not going to have the king of Sodom say he gave Abraham anything.
Mm-hmm.
This is a parlay. This is a peace talk between kings in the land or valley of the kings. Okay. The land or valley of the kings was the place where kings would meet before war. And so now here goes Sodom saying, all right, you conquered everything. Can I just have my people back? Abraham says, I'll give it all back to you, right? However, that doesn't change Abraham owning it. He was not granting authority to Sodom. He was just letting Sodom exist on his land, which Yahweh confirmed was his. It was promised to Abraham. And if it was promised to Abraham, it had to be during his lifetime or Yahweh was a liar. Now he says, I'll give it to you and your descendants, but it had to be given to Abraham as well. Then when he goes and buys the cave of Machpelah, guess what? He purchases land from the Hittites, who were one of the groups that were not involved in the war, and he did not have ownership of, but they call him a Sar. They call him a prince among them. So rest assured, Abraham was the big cheese in the land of Canaan. However, he had a bunch of disobedient constituents, right? So now he says the outcry has come, and I'm going to go see whether it's true, right? Yahweh says this to Abraham, but he says, with your permission, I'm going to go see if it's true. Let's get back into the text. Now, as I'm going to tell you right now, this is some of the most powerful stuff that I ever encountered because it's going to lean in a direction that I think a lot of you may have never maybe even encountered before. And we're going to get into it here. All right, so the next thing that happens is he says, Um, I'm going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I've heard, and if not, I want to know. The other men turned and headed to Sodom. Why? Because Abraham had sent them. But Yahweh remains with Abraham. Abraham approaches him and says, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Now, I want to show you something. Okay? He's the first one to use tisva, tisva, from the root word or from the lexical root safa. And he even says the Sadiq, the righteous one, who? The equal distributor of wealth, with the whom? The Rasha. Who was the Rasha? One who destroyed with their wounds, one who destroyed with their twisted mind. That's the Rasha. Okay? The Rasha. And if you look here in the Septuagint, it actually uses this word right here, which consequently isn't used anywhere else, which is sune peleses. Peleses, sune paleses, sune paleses, which is basically the concept of a synchronized connection. In other words, what Abraham is saying in the Greek here, that this is how the Jews interpreted it, right? Remember earlier when I said there are Jewish texts, which is Josephus, the Septuagint, the texts that are basically the other books that back up the Tanakh are hints to what it's really saying in the New Testament. Well, this word isn't used in the New Testament, but what it literally means, the sune, is the same word that we use for synagogue. It's unity. So he's saying, will you unify the twisted, destructive mind with the Sadiq? And the Sadiq is the equal distributor of wealth. Who was this Sadiq that Abraham was speaking of?
He was talking about Lot.
He was talking about Lot, whose righteous soul was vexed daily, according to Peter. So now what Abraham is doing, he's saying, are you going to mix the two by doing this? Right? But here's the interesting about this. When it says in the discussion, the word destroy, let me show you this. Okay, this is just a kind of a side note that you need to be aware of. In the Hebrew, the word safa means to sweep or snatch away. Okay, and it's basically from the idea of shaving or scraping. Okay, so will you scrape away the righteous with the wicked? But here's the interesting thing about it is the ramifications of the volcanic activity that was about to occur. Because that shaving or scraping has to do with the idea of completely moving the land, right? Mm-hmm. Which we know, for all intents and purposes, what we're dealing with there is that East African Rift Valley. But here's the part that's crazy, is that it basically is the concept of, if you will, destruction. In fact, in the King James, that's how it reads. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? But where they get that from is the Greek word here, which is to unify destruction? Will you unify the destruction between the righteous and the wicked? Diakon. Diakon or diakos is the word for righteous in Greek. Meta is the word with or in connection with. And then asebus is the wicked, right? And so what he's saying is will you connect them together, right? And do this thing? And so here's the interesting thing about this. This is Abraham talking to Yahweh, right? But who brought up the destruction? Not Yahweh. He said, I'm just going to go down and find out what's going on. But Abraham brings up the destruction, and he had already sent or given permission to the angels to go destroy his land. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh is acknowledging Abraham's authority as not only a son of Adam and having dominion over the land, which is going to bring us to a very important point here in a minute. And that point is that Yahweh will not do anything without permission first from mankind. They have to consent to destruction. They have to consent to the book of Revelation. Okay? But furthermore, he acknowledges Abraham's authority over the subject. With your permission, I'll go down and listen, right? To the cry, right? And what do the angels say? Yahweh has heard the cry. Now, we could get into how that was known, or we could accept that Abraham, in this discussion he's about to have with Yahweh, is actually acknowledging the cry. Which means Lot could have sent messengers to Abraham saying this city is wicked. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But Abraham, in his discussion, now says,
he knew it was. He knew it was before he even sent the messengers down there.
Right. Peradventure, there will be 50 righteous in the city. Will you destroy and not spare the place for 50 righteous? Let's talk about that for a minute. That you would not spare, right? Spare. That you would not lift up or carry the city. Another indication of what's going to happen to this place, right? A cataclysmic event. But the premise is that you would not lift up the place for the sake of 50 righteous. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's either an elevation or a descension. Again, indicating that Sodom would fall into the earth, right? That the earth would open up and Sodom and all of its inhabitants would fall into it. And we know they had already fallen in the tar pits. We know there was already volcanic activity going on. Do you know that tar pits are actually the first sign of a large volcanic event about to occur?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Okay. So now, by the way, I learned all that in geology in college. Okay. So now, Yahweh said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, I will spare all the place for their sakes. Let's see what it says in Hebrew. I will what? Lift. I will lift the entire place for their sakes. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what's interesting is what it actually says, where it says for their sakes, right? It is actually the Hebrew word avar, to pass over. So horrible translation for the sake of or on the account of or because and in order of, right? In the sense of crossed. Ridiculous. 8 times misinterpreted. All right. Getting back to it though. For their sake, I will pass over, but I will also lift that place. So what's interesting is he says, if I find 50 righteous, 50 Sadakim in their midst, right? Bethok, in the midst of them, right?
Mhm.
I won't do it. And then it says, Abraham answered and said, behold now. Now I want you to watch this. This is powerful. Look at this. Do you guys see that? Behold now. Right? I have taken upon myself to speak. What is Abraham just done here? What do you think are the ramifications here? What do you think Abraham is doing here? If we go back into the verses, it says right here, far be it from you to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked. Now, here's an interesting word. So we saw that idea of sweeping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now what we are finding is the word slaying, mut, kill, but not kill how you would think, because mut does not mean kill. It means die, right? So he says, far be it from you to slay, right? Well, what conjugation is this in? We have to go to the reverse inline to see this. What conjugation is that destroy or slay in? It's in the Hifil. Far be it from you to cause to die. This is different than the word kill. Okay. Let me show you. This is different from the word kill. Look at that. That's kill. Ratzach. Lo tirtzach. Thou shalt not kill. Very different from the conjugation of the Hifil. So what is Abraham saying here? And why is he saying cause to die instead of kill? Because the cataclysmic event that is going to be called is not going to be a discerner of persons, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he's saying, will you sweep away the righteous of the wicked? But then in this one, he's saying, far be it from you, right? Far be it from you to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and the righteous should be as the wicked, that be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Listen to this dude talking to God. And y'all can't get that they felt like they were on equal standing with each other, so much so that the scribes felt threatened that that was true and felt that it would be impossible for Abraham to be in that state with Yahweh. But yet Yeshua claims that that is something possible, and Paul claimed that Yeshua believed it was possible. The scribes lie and manipulate the Torah. The Torah still calculates the same no matter which letter you have there, But just changing those letters that they changed, they altered the state in which Abraham is giving command to Yahweh. Okay. So, anyways, now we have him saying, right, that far be it from you, halala, right? That be far. In other words, let it be far away, right? Or not near you, that type of reputation exists, right? And so then he says, the Tzaddik with the Rasha, right? Will you cause to die the righteous with the wicked? Now, what's interesting about this is Yahweh brings this up later on in Ezekiel. Okay. In Ezekiel, he says, if Abraham was present in a city, I would not spare that city for Abraham's sake, but Abraham would be saved. Crazy, huh? Okay. So he says, if I find 50,
Just like he didn't destroy Rahab when he destroyed all of
Jericho.
Jericho. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All
Right.
of Jericho was destroyed, but Rahab was saved.
Right. Right. That's right. So when we are working through this in this grammar, we're finding that these two are equally speaking with each other, and this is not some have mercy on me thing. Why? Because Abraham turns around and uses the word na. And watch this. So he says, I've taken upon me to speak, even though I am but dust and ashes, right? So now he's referencing the garden and saying, hey, look, you had mercy on Abraham. How about these people, right? Abraham keeps showing himself to have humility, not because he's in the presence of Yahweh, because we already know the scribes hid that from us, right? But what we know is that he is definitely considering him equal. But why is he showing himself to be frail in front of this man? Why is he showing himself to be lower than this man he's in the presence of, except that he's showing how frail Sodom and Gomorrah really are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, I'm going to speak as a man so that you don't destroy men here, right? Okay, so then in verse 29, he spoke unto him yet again and said, peradventure there are 40. And he said, I will not do it for 40's sake. But now watch this. In verse 29, I believe it is. Let me check this. Yeah, that word ulay right here, ulay or ulai. Perhaps. Okay, perhaps. So if it may be. So perhaps there might be. So I want you to think about this for a minute, okay? Because it says peradventure, right? In the English, it says peradventure. If we go into, say, I don't know, the NLT, that might read it a little bit different. Please don't be angry with my Lord, right? Let's take a look at that one. Please don't be angry. Look, it actually uses the word nah here, right? There's that word nah again, right? And this right here, not may you be angry, but interestingly enough, it is Abraham in the Husif, right? Used to issue a command in the third person, right? And so what? Abraham is saying, okay, let me explain to you how I think it went down. The greater shall serve the lesser. The greater comes to Abraham, puts himself underneath him and says, I will go down and listen. And Abraham says, if you listen and you find righteous, how many? How many righteous? I tell you what, I say 50. How about 45? I say 35. How about 30? I say 20. How about 10? You know what? I think 10 is sufficient. And that becomes the commandment of the minyan. But the premise is that Abraham is not negotiating with Yahweh here. He's working through this. And if you read the different phrases, like don't be angry with me, which needless to say, yachar is not anger. That's a very different word. But don't be angry with me. You know, I am but ashes and dust. You don't understand what Abraham's doing. He's the owner of Sodom. The judgment has come up to Yahweh, and Yahweh's like, hey, let's talk about your boy, right? Let's talk about your boy Sodom. You gave him the land, you gave him the people, and you gave him the wealth. I know you got the land, but something's got to give here. Because they're doing what? They're exploiting the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, and the Levite. Because the same Torah applies to all. And it was not Sodom's land that Abraham was dwelling on. In fact, it wasn't even Oner, Eshcol, and Mamre's land that Abraham was dwelling on. Abraham was dwelling on Abraham's land. Sodom was dwelling on Abraham's land. Oner, Eshcol, and Mamre were dwelling on Abraham's land. See? And so we have this interconnected discussion about how many should be allowed, right? You find 50 righteous, good. If you find 45, still don't do it. If you find, and all the way down to if there are, and I want you to understand that word ule is suppose, right? So if you find 50, don't destroy it. And he even says, far be it from you. Listen, this is how Hebrews used to speak. When Yeshua says, I'm going to go into the city and be betrayed, and the Son of Man is going to be lifted up. How does Peter speak? Far be it from you, Lord. May it be far from you. In the movie Fiddler on the Roof, they come to the rabbi and they say, Rabbi, is there a blessing for the czar? And he says, yes, there is a blessing for the czar. May the czar be far away from us, right? Right. So, and I know there's more to that, but the premise is that basically when you are working with the idea that what Abraham is saying here, when he says, far be it from you, when he says, I'm dust and ashes and all that, what he's saying is, Yahweh, you acknowledge me. Who the heck am I? You acknowledge me. So why wouldn't you acknowledge them? And you honor me, and yet I am frail. I'm dust and ashes. Don't be angry with me. Why is he saying that? Because he doesn't want them to be angry with Sodom. He doesn't want just people to be destroyed with the wicked. Okay. So that is the rabbi's nugget of who is actually speaking when Abraham is talking to somebody in 18. He's the one who sends the messengers. Lot's the one doing the crying. Whatever these men are that show up and get their feet washed and eat food, are able to destroy a city, are able to destroy a city. But I asked a question in my rabbi's nugget. I said, what does the word destroy actually mean? Okay. Right?
Mhm.
Okay. So, of course, that's coming from 23, verse 23. We'll go take a look at this. Right here. To sweep away. Let's take a look at this. In the ancient pictograph, the word safa. Okay. You guys ready for this? It's the word consume, to eat or drink with the lips, right? Because the parent root actually is samek pe, which is what? The pictograph of a thorn represent turning, and the pe is a picture of the mouth representing, I'm sorry, the thorn is a picture of a thorn representing turning, and the pe is a picture of a mouth. Combine these mean turning mouth. The rim or the lips of a bowl which encircle it. The bowl is used for gathering things together and for eating. Soph in and of itself is a tub or a container with a lip, right? Oh, but look at this. The word safa, which is the word for language, is sheen, pei, hey. However, we don't ever pronounce the sheen. Just see this right here. This is where I'm talking about, right here. Hold on. My screen's acting funny. There we go, right there. That word safa is the word for language, right? Right there, language. Okay. Now, as in spoken from the lips, remember that we have dentals, labials, glottals, and nasals. And we have one other. We have glottals, nasals, dentals, labials. Dentals are T sounds. Labials are words made with the lips. Okay. And so that's where this comes from. However, what I want you to think about is that the sheen is not pronounced with an S. This is an Aramaic tweak to the language. The sheen is actually pronounced SH. In fact, even in the Cyrillic, the shape of the sheen, which is a three-pronged letter, is the same. The SH has always been about the sh sound in these pictographs. The scene is actually just a Aramaic version. Remember, okay, let me, before you get too caught up or confused on this, let me explain. Okay. And then we'll get back to it. Remember when the Israelites are going to fight um, or have a conflict with the uh, um, with the Benjamites because of the bad thing that the Benjamites did with the Levites' concubine, right?
Mhm.
In order to determine whether or not they were from Benjamin or not, is they would have them say the word shibboleth, because if you were Benjamite, would pronounce it incorrectly and say Sibboleth. It's where the sheen and the sheen is pronounced as an S or is pronounced as a SH. And they had concluded that if you couldn't pronounce it with an SH, you were actually not, you were being influenced by foreigners. Okay. And so the concept there, and I believe that might be in the rabbinical commentary, maybe in a Chumash, that says the reason why they were saying Sibboleth is because they were fraternizing with the Philistines. So now we have the sheen, okay, being pronounced as an S, safa, right, which means language. But the word safa is cognate with the word safa in this verse, used 20 times to be consumed, destroy, add, perish, augment, keep, joined, and put. But the way that I want you to think about it is more along the lines that this is the word that's translated destroy in the King James. Because what? It would be the thorn of the lip. Or thorn speaks, which would be what? The accuser, right? But the hay adds an observer. So now you are beholding the thorn of the accuser. So really, what is the word for destroy here? Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Will you use your words to create the thorn? Right? That's the concept here. Okay, so now the reason that's important is because now we get to something interesting, and that is that this has to just have to do with a word. So let's consider something here. I'm going to read to you something. I'm not going to share it with you. I'm just going to read it to you and tell me now what you think of this verse. In fact, I'm just going to show it to you. I was just going to read it to you, but I'm going to show it to you because we've had lots of screen time today. So I think people are either used to it or they're going to get over it. One of the two. 1929, but God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities on the plain. But now look at this. In the Young's Literal, in verse 29, it came to pass in God's destroying the cities of the circuit that God remembered Abraham and sendeth Lot out of the midst of the overthrow in overthrowing of the cities in which Lot dwelt. Okay, now, and Abraham riseth early in the morning unto the place where he hath stood before the face of Yahweh. For not this part right here in verse 21, he says to him, lo, I've accepted thy face also for this thing. Okay. Oops. Lo, I have accepted thy face also for this thing. So in the Hebrew, the way this reads is, behold, I have lifted, right? Not accepted. I have lifted your face, right? Ignore this word accepted. See, this is the problem that I have with the Blue Letter Bible, is that they will not put the correct definition in there. This is to lift. The word nasa. You should learn this word nasa. To lift or carry thy face. I have lifted your face, right? Also, or in addition to. And for the sake of the thing, for the sake of this thing, right? That I won't, that not, I will, here's this word, chafach, to overthrow or overturn. Okay. Again, this possible volcanic activity, right? But it's also has the pay in it as well. So I will, for the sake of it, I will not, right, overturn the city which you have spoken. So it's interesting. I have lifted your face. Where do we hear that? Neuronic blessing, right? Ye saw Yahweh, Hanecha, right? So the premise is in all of this is that Lot now is telling God what to do, right? And he doesn't say it. Look at this, is what he says. He says, behold, please. In other words, look, I acknowledge your authority, but look, this city right here, right? This city that I am close to, that's not clicking for some reason. This city right here that I'm close to, right? Let me flee to there, right? And behold, it's a little one. So now he says, behold, but he says it in the please, right? But then he also says right here, let me escape. There's that na again, right? But then Yahweh says back to him, I have accepted your face. I have lifted your face for the sake of this thing. And I will not turn the city upside down. Right? Okay. So the reason this is important is because who overthrows the cities? Third person, masculine singular. So whoever it is, it's one person. How many men were in Sodom? Two, right? So now a singular person overthrows the cities. And if we go into the New Living Translation, it actually says, and he utterly destroyed them along with the other cities and villages of the plain, wiping out all the people and every bit of vegetation. So what does that mean? Who actually destroys it? Who is he? Who overthrows the land? notice something. The word safa is not used here, right? Think about this. The word safa is not used here. It's a different word, right? A different word is being used here. Why is that important? Because Abraham said, will you sweep away? But then Lot says, don't overthrow. And then he overthrows. So how is it that Yahweh is going to go down and look, but Abraham says, don't destroy? How is it that he says, the city will be consumed with iniquity, and yet Lot says, don't overthrow? Are we all confused, right? Is Abraham confused with what Yahweh says? Yahweh says, I'll go look. And of course, Abraham says, don't destroy, right? What the heck? And then the angel says to Lot, get out of here, lest you're consumed consumed in the iniquity of the city. And Lot concludes that's an overthrowing. So we have the cry or the report of the wickedness of the city, right? And then we have the action of the wickedness of the city, the consumption of the wickedness of the city. The cry of the wickedness of the city and then the consumption of the wickedness of the city. But Abraham concludes that has something to do with sweeping away, and Lot has a conclusion that has something to do with an overturning.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Did they misinterpret?
Maybe they had their own expectations.
And what expectations actually occurred? I propose that these two men are prophets and that nothing happens without Yahweh's prophets. I propose that when Lot's soul was vexed daily, that he was just tolerating and putting up with the fact that he had to warn them first, which they said was a judge. He was on the city council and he's trying to tell them, look, if you don't change your ways, something bad's going to happen. Abraham, watching from a distance because he did not choose to live in the realm of Sodom, but lived in the realm of the Amorites, which consequently, what did Yahweh tell Abraham in his first covenant with Abraham? The sin of the Amorites is not complete, but the sin of Sodom was. So the premise is that as the sin of Sodom came into its completion, now here comes Lot prophesying to them that they were going to be destroyed. They don't listen and change their ways like Nineveh did with Jonah, but instead continue to move in the direction of destruction. So Lot now says, okay, now that I'm out of the city, I kind of want to go to this small city here and be safe from the destruction. That's not what he says. He says, don't overthrow. Then in the next verse, it says, I will listen to you. I have raised your countenance. I have raised your face, right? And then he takes and brings him to Zor, which was not Zeboim, but Adamah. He brings him to Adamah, and then, interestingly enough, says, I have listened to your voice. I will not overthrow. But then in the next verse, he overthrows everything using Lot's words of judgment. Abraham,
Because he can't let a word of the prophet fall to the ground.
and that is because Yahweh will do nothing without the permission of man. Proof is in the fact that the first thing that happens in the conversation between him and Abraham is the Nun Aleph, Na. Where this becomes extremely important.
And the reason being is because man has dominion over the earth.
Right? But also, Abraham was in a state of mastery. When Yahweh, quote unquote, appeared to him, Yahweh was his higher self. Abraham was in a state of mastery, and we know that the righteous requirements of the law are fulfilled in us who walk according to the Spirit, not according to the flesh. Abraham was not in his ego. And so Yahweh was able to confer with him about Sodom and Gomorrah. Hey, Abraham, your land there, they're acting up. What are we going to do? Abraham's like, well, tell you what, you go down there and check and see if you can find 10 righteous. Really, I would rather it be 50, but if you can find 10, I think I'm good with that. Then you can't destroy the city. But if you can't even find 10, wipe them off the map. Shave it. Then Lot says, hey, before you flip them upside down, right? Also indicating the volcanic event, I would like to go move to this other city. Yahweh says, hey, I've already raised your countenance, go. But then when Lot sees the overthrow, words he used, not Yahweh, when Lot sees the overthrow, then he gets scared and flees to the mountain, and of course by so doing creates a false Torah in which sexual immorality ends up occurring. However, and this is important, there is evidence in Vayera that if Abraham had not been in that state of Resh Aleph, and it would have been Aleph Resh, then Yahweh's sovereignty would have prevailed. Meaning what? When we are in a state of mastery, when we have an internal locus of control, we are empowered to be Elohim and co-create with God. But when we are not in a state of mastery, and we are not in a state, and we are in our ego and everything else, then Yahweh has his sovereignty because we've already forfeited our authority through fear and doubt. And that's the key to the rabbi's nuggets today, is that when you are in a state of mastery, you will co-create with God. You will, and it's not even co-creation, because in the end, what's going on? The intensification of all power in the universe is enabling you to, on your whim, rule as you see fit. But if you are doing it from your ego, there will be balance. But if you are doing it from a state of mastery, you are enabled. You have power. You have dunamis, not exousia. Exousia is the authority. All authority has been granted to me in heaven and earth, therefore go forth. But it also says that the saints of God who remain would do great exploits, our dunamis, energy, the same energy that flowed out of Yeshua when the woman with the hem of her garment was touched. I mean, the hem of his garment was touched by the woman with the issue of blood. And so this parasha is crucial to the coexistence between man and God as an equality in God's eyes, because we are like him. We are in his image. We have his attributes. And in that way, Abraham was in full capacity in covenant with Yahweh, being obedient to the covenant through circumcision, accepting the prophecy and belief that he would have a son, and thereby demonstrating it. And Abraham believed God and was counted him for righteousness before Ishmael was ever even born. Ishmael was not chosen because Sarah was the one whom Yahweh was favoring, because she was the unloved wife in what appears to be a Levirate marriage. And then, in addition to all of that, there is the concept that Abraham gives Yahweh permission to go look for 50. If there aren't 50, work it down to 10. But if you can't find even 10, wipe it off the map. Lot gives him permission to flip it upside down, which was the volcanic event of continental uplift or escarpment or whatever. But what's interesting is in the East African Rift Valley, everything is falling down into a fiery hell. Right?
Interesting words.
I figured I'd throw that in there. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Well, we are at 4:33, and that's actually 1 hour over when I usually want to stop and take a break before our evening session. But I think today, since we don't have any more questions, and there was a lot that we covered in this chapter, that we should go ahead and end and meditate upon these things, and basically have the rest of that little bit of sunlight that's left Shabbat to kind of have our own time together. So if there are no other questions and we have gotten everything kind of talked out, which I feel like we did, some of it I accidentally didn't record, but I kind of recapped some interesting things about Sarah actually not lying to God, which is really interesting. And then the concept of the Abraham deciding what destruction would occur and Lot deciding what destruction would occur, because on the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses let everything be established. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.